Hey everybody, welcome back to another Krita tutorial. Today we're going to talk about gradient maps and how to make some cool holographic type effects with them. And this video is completely inspired by a tutorial that Cynic's Design made on YouTube, which I will link below. So if you don't have Krita and you prefer to use Photoshop, you can use his method on how to do all this in Photoshop. I decided to try it out and see what the difference would be in Krita versus Photoshop, and I'm actually pretty pleased with the results. So before I discuss all that, let's get started. So here I've made a complete sphere. I went and shaded it, did some basic lighting on it. You don't have to do this if you want. This is for demonstration purposes only. And as you can see here, I have the layer, right? It's nicely shaded. It's not perfect. I used the shape tool, so there are some gaps. It doesn't mean anything in the long run. So what we need to do to start anything, make your file that you want to work with, keep that layer, save it, all that fun stuff. And once you're done doing that, you're going to go up to Filter, Map, and Gradient Map. So immediately you're going to see some craziness happen. Now, because I already had Krita open, I was just making some random, this isn't even a holographic type map or anything, it's just me messing around with colors. It looks kind of crazy right now. Right, it kind of looks like those ice creams you get from, like those rocket pops, those ice cream things. The red, white, and blue. Anyway, so when you have the gradient map up, before you do anything, I want you to create a filter mask. So what this does is it retains the original layer that you made, or that you're working with, and it makes everything non-destructive. That way, if you want to make changes to this gradient, you can go back and do that by going into that new gradient map, going up, right-clicking on it, and then going to Properties, and you can bring that up. And you can go ahead and switch the preset of the gradient, change the colors, all that stuff. It's non-destructive. It's much better to do it this way. Do not, I mean, you can use it without a mask layer, but I highly recommend using the filter mask. So I'm going to go down to a gradient I made after this, just to make it a little easier to look at to see what's going on. So on here, you can see in the original that the light is coming from the top right and the shadows are on the bottom left. Here in the gradient, you can kind of see what color is going where. The blues down here are in the darker areas, and these other colors are in the brighter areas. Now if I switch that, well, I'll put it here. This is being moved over to the bright area. So this whole gradient, the left side will be the dark colors, so the blue or whatever color you pick is going to start replacing those dark shadows with that color. And on the right hand side of the gradient map here, these colors are going to be stuck in the brighter areas. So if I want to go ahead and add, we'll just add a pink here. See, make that little, there we go. So the hottest spot is now that pink. Okay, I'm going to click on that. I'm actually going to delete it. I'm going to put the white back there. Whoops, I just moved it off. Let's put that back in. Did not mean to drag it all the way. All right, there we go. Another thing I want to point out is you do want a smooth gradient. Now there is some banding on here, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And the banding means you can see the edges of where the gradient starts to blend. So we're not going to worry about that right this second. But one way to fix that is to make sure the blending is nice and smooth here. If you're going to have some really harsh edges, you're more likely to get some banding. If we're going to blend these colors a little bit better, you can see here it's nice. Move this back down a little bit, it starts to blend a little bit nicer. Move the green up a little. It's subtle, but it's there. Alright, so that is one thing to keep in mind. I'm going to hit OK. Another thing you can do to prevent the banding is go to Image Properties, go to Color Space, and you can change the depth. So my original test was in 32-bit, so I'm going to go back to 32-bit and I'm going to hit OK. You go over here to Properties. I'm going to kind of tweak this a little bit to get a smoother look. Alright, so I went and added a little bit more color variation. The banding isn't as bad. So when you're making these gradients and it's looking a little bit bandy, one way to help reduce that is to use a higher bit channel. 32, 16, it'll make a difference. But you don't have to if you don't want to. I know a lot of people have limitations on what their computer can do. And if you only have 8-bit as you saw beforehand, it's not going to be a deal breaker to work in 8-bit. So I'm actually going to go back to 8-bit just because I want this video to be able to record without any issue. Alright, so I'm actually going to rip my layers off here, and I'm going to make the thumbnail size a little smaller so I can see the layer names. So this gradient map is one we just made. I'm going to turn that off, and as you can see, that filter mask is now off, and my original shader ball is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It hasn't been permanently affected by anything. I can go back to some of the ones I worked on earlier. So this one, I tweaked the colors and went for a more pastel look. You can see that it looks much smoother. This one, I did some pretty radical colors with this. And again, there's a little bit of banding in here, but it still works for what it is. Again, these are just tests. I'm not too worried about it. And then the last one, I don't know what I was doing, but I went really crazy with it. This was my first test. You can see the banding is really bad. The colors don't really blend. There's other things going on with it. So you can see some of the results you get by just completely going crazy. Alright, so if you go back and to your gradient map and you go back to the original layer that you're working with, the shader ball or whatever it is, you want to make some edits, it will affect your gradient map. So let's say, I'm going to turn that off. Maybe I want it a little darker down here. Right click and make that color there. As you can see, it's obviously making it darker automatically. I'm not making any color edits. This is completely gray, blackish, whatever. I can blend this. Alright, so as you can see, I've updated the shader ball here, and it's updated the gradient map automatically as well. I don't have to go back and redo anything and worry about like redoing the whole gradient map and reapplying those colors and everything else. Alright, now if you've noticed, if I go ahead and start blending it like this, so I'm bringing some of that bright color down, the gradient map is going to update that. That's the brighter area. We're going to replace those bright areas with that lighter color as in the gradient map, but it's also going in the direction that you're blending. So whatever you're using to blend, make sure that the direction of your blend is the direction that you want the gradient to be as well. So this is going to be a nice smooth gradient transition here. I'm going back and forth, kind of like in a U-shaped motion. So when you're blending, make sure you're doing it in a good direction so that if banding does show, you're not going, oh, how do I change the direction of that? Your overall blending movement and direction is going to affect that. Alright, so we're done with the shader ball. We've already figured out, okay, I get the idea of the gradient map replacing the light areas and the dark areas, and now you want to apply it to something more fun. I'm going to actually turn that off. So here, move this over here. I made a really sloppy arm with the shirt. It's not even accurate in terms of wrinkles and stuff, but it's just there to get the idea across. So we're going to apply a gradient map, and the same thing. We're going to go to Filter, Map, Gradient Map. Alright, so we're going to go back to that gradient we used. We're going to change this to a dark purple. Change that to a purple as well. And we'll change this to a little bit of a purple color. We're going to hit Create Filter Mask. The new one's made. Great, it's perfect, right? And if we want to tweak this a little bit, because there's not many dark spots on this, so there's not going to be much purple showing up, we can actually just go ahead and push this up here. Move this in anywhere we want here. So if I want a nice purple outline, I can do that. I'm actually going to cancel that because there's another thing that in the Cynic's tutorial he brought up, which was a really good point. So we're going to do another filter mask. So we're going to go to Filter, we're going to Adjust, and we're going to go to Levels. I don't remember if he used levels, but I prefer to use the levels for this. We're actually going to adjust this here. I'm actually going to turn that gradient map off. There we go. So now we have our levels filter map. Again, non-destructive editing, so the original is still there. I kind of actually messed up the original, but whatever, it's fine. So I tweaked it with the levels. I can turn the gradient map on. It looks a little crazy right now. So the gradient map is still going to update with the levels. So whatever you're doing here, the gradient map is always going to be under the levels filter mask. If I were to move this down, it's not really going to do too much. It still has an interesting effect, but it makes more sense to me to put the levels on top. And then we can go ahead and change the gradient map. Again, right click, properties, and we can start. Alright, we're just gonna hit OK with that. So it's got some really weird, shiny look to it, right? And again, if you want to switch it around, see if that makes anything look different. Maybe you like this effect better. That's totally fine and up to you. It gives you a lot of freedom and wiggle room to make this look however you want. Now, obviously, if you want this to be a little different, you'd like, oh, I don't like how the shadows look. You can go, like I said, with the shader ball, you can go back in and say, I want this to be a little, let me do that. We turn the levels on, we turn the gradient map on, and we can see that kind of updated. You can see like the white here to add a little bit more of the wrinkle definition, and it gives it a little bit of an interesting look. If I put the gradient map on top, you can kind of see it here as well. So that's one way to get a really interesting, dramatic look for the gradient map if you want that really extreme holographic look, which I think is pretty cool. So the one that I did, I think it was this one. I went ahead and changed everything so it looks a little different now, but I had some fun with it, and the green I think looked pretty cool. I don't know, it's just a fun little trick, I guess, or technique. I'm going to go ahead now and open up another file to show you what it looks like on some actual clothes and some things you can do there. Alright, so I'm sure you're familiar with this image by now, because I seem to have used it for a couple things now. I wanted to see what her dress would look like with some holographic coloring on it. So as you can see, I did the same thing here. I had a levels and a gradient map. So if I take that off, this is a big file, sorry. It's just a black and white grayscale image. So nothing dramatic has changed, nothing major has changed, it's just grayscale, right? So I can go back to the levels, I can turn that on, and I went and made really harsh shadows here. Very dramatic, very different from the original, but it's going to give me more depth for the color that I want. And I turn the gradient map on, and now I have a really cool, shiny, holographic type look. I have some movement here. This looks really nice in my opinion. This does not, because again, the direction of my shading does not really match. I probably should go back in and make a nice directional shading, like make this less dark, but that's fine. It has a really cool metallic shiny material look to it, and it's very easy to apply, very easy to go back and edit. If I wanted to take all that purple out, I can just go and edit this again. You take that purple, maybe I want like a dark green, might be a little too dark. Let's see here. Okay, it's got a little bit more of a shiny green material now with a little bit of blue. Honestly, I probably should keep the blue in there because I think it makes it look, it pops that green better. Anyway, but that's how you can use that gradient map in Krita to make those cool effects, and I'm really glad that I can make that within Krita without worrying about destroying the original gradient or the original layer. I'm sure there's a way to do that in Photoshop as well, to make a non-destructive edit like this. And if you, like I said, if you want to go back and change the shading, you can on that original layer. You can even duplicate the original layer and then move the gradient maps to it. So I actually have a duplicate here. So if I wanted to go back and say, oh, I want this duplicate here, I change something on it, if I want both versions, I can just duplicate the layer or the mask and apply it to the new one. And then I have a copy of both of these. Actually move that up to make sure it's matching. So now I have my original edit and then I have a duplicate of the new one. And that's pretty much it. I hope this video was helpful to you guys. I hope you can go and make some really cool effects with the gradient map. I definitely enjoy this, and I really want to go back and start throwing this technique on everything because it is fun. If you have any questions about the gradient map feature, leave them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them, or I'll make a video on them, depending on the question type. Make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.